Crispin, what a joy to welcome you to Win today. Thanks for being here.
I'm so glad to be here. I just love the topics that you cover, the stuff you're
Thanks.
talking about. And so just felt like I was just really grateful to be asked.
Awesome. Well, I mean, hand in glove, this is mental health. This is emotional health. This is spiritual growth. This is the target of Win today. So, as we said, I think this conversation is going to be hand in glove. And today we are talking about attachment styles, and we'll get into the nuances of how that works out. But, like I said, I want to set a baseline for our conversation, though, just so the listeners, even if they're unfamiliar with what we're going to talk about, have a baseline understanding. So you're a licensed
Mhm.
professional counselor, which I love. So here's where I'd like to start.
Yeah.
Give us an overview of what attachment styles are, and then some working knowledge of how they play out day to day.
Yeah. So attachment science started with babies, actually, and looking at the fact that babies need connection. And that sounds obvious now, but in the 1930s, 1940s, 50s, basically people understood kids need to be clothed, they need to be fed, they need sleep. But they don't actually need connection. And so that was where attachment science was born, to realize as humans, we need connection. We are created for a relationship. And when it feels like when it feels like that connection is insecure, we're not sure, right? Like, is mom there? There are these different ways we reach out. And as the field developed, we found that this actually happens at all stages of life. And so that happens with babies, that happens with kids, that happens with my wife and I, right? When there's a rupture and it feels like, oh, like, are we okay? Like, you just said something and I don't know if we're in a good place right now. Like, I'm going to reach out to try to reconnect. And so we found that that also extends to God. And so we can look at this science that says, yeah, we're driven to connect and keep closeness with the people that are that we love. And so we will adapt these different behaviors to do that. And then what they found over time is that there are these attachment styles. There are these strategies that we will go back to over and over to try to get connection. And so that's the different basically patterns. And they saw these patterns show up with kids. Some kids would just like hold on to mom's skirt, because if I hold on to her skirt, she can't go anywhere. We saw some kids that would just go play on their own and kind of be like, well, if you leave, I don't really care because I don't need you anyway. I will explain how that actually fits into getting connection. But what they found is that those same sort of patterns show up throughout our lives, even as adults.
And what I hear you saying is our formative years are critical for how these attachment styles are developed, because like a tape recorder, we're recording experiences of life, ages 0 to 7. And then 30 years on, we're living through the lens of that tape playback, for good or for bad, for functional or dysfunctional, tonic or toxic. And so is there anything else we need to know about these formative years and really, it's sort of sad then for people who had crappy childhoods or crappy experiences with their parents, because there's a lot to unravel then. But what is the strength then of development in childhood when we're thinking about playing the long game in terms of emotional health?
Yeah, so that's one piece, is that 50% of the population has a secure attachment. And so we find that there are a lot of kids that grow up having the ability to approach themselves and relationships in healthy ways. The other good news is that even if you have developed one of those insecure attachment styles, there's always healing. And in fact, they did a study that found that they would track people, and 25% of people within a group that they were tracking over 4 years changed their attachment style. And that has a lot to do with finding healing relationships. And then there are also different times in our lives that those attachment frameworks really are more moldable. So yeah, 0 to 7, especially 0 to 2 is huge. But we also know that teenagers can have that as well, late teens, early 20s. And so you think about some folks that have a terrible childhood, but they come into a healthy community or they have a healthy relationship, and they can actually start to, it's called earned secure attachment. So,
wow. Yeah. Okay, well, this is really cool for people. And, for people not familiar with you at all, just let's hit pause real fast. Give people just a flyover of who you are, your credentials, because I want people to understand they're not just talking with a well-studied layperson, but instead a professional. So I think this is important.
Yeah. So I have my 4-year degree in Bible and theology and went on to get my master's in counseling. I was in full-time ministry for 3 years. And then I've been in essentially private practice for the past 7 years. Yeah. And during that process, I've also received advanced training in emotionally focused therapy, which is a couples therapy based on attachment. So looking again at like, what are those ways that babies and their moms interact? Mm-hmm. And actually we can see that shows up with couples. Mm-hmm. And so I'm standing on the shoulders of Sue Johnson, was the founder of that theory, who has just studied so much attachment theory, and that whole community that has helped me understand how our drive for connection shows up in our relationships.
This might be a gross over exaggeration of a point, but I'm just curious about this while we're early on in the conversation. When we think about attachment styles and how they manifest in our lives, are those an expose of dysfunction in our lives? Basically, do dysfunctional patterns in our lives more easily point to an attachment style versus, oh, actually, I'm pretty healthy. I had a great upbringing, et cetera, et cetera. How does that play out? Is that a decent question, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'm really glad that you brought that up, because there are these categories for research where we put people in, are you secure or insecure? And essentially that means, are you healthy or unhealthy? Yeah. And what I find is most helpful is that we all get into these points in life where we feel insecure, where we feel like, I don't know if that person I love is there for me. I feel alone. And that's when we reach for that insecure style. So as we start to talk through the styles, you'll see, oh yeah, maybe I don't do this all the time, but when my stress is high, or when my relationship's not going well, when, things aren't going well between my partner and I, or a friend and I, it can show up in all these relationships. It's like, oh yeah, I notice that I tend towards this way. And so I think considering it as a spectrum is really helpful. And I think even people that have done really great work will notice, a lot of healing work and therapy that are in a really healthy place. It doesn't mean that they don't do those things. It's like, oh yeah, I noticed I did that, but I could talk myself through it and talk through it with the person that's important to me.
Okay, then well, give us a flyover of the spectrum of attachment styles.
Yeah. So the first one is anxious. And this is that idea of the relationship really falls squarely on me. And so that's the infant that's holding on to mom's skirt, right? But in adult relationships, that can look like, sending lots of text messages and worrying, right? You haven't texted me back and it's been 10 minutes. Are we okay? Really being focused so much on the relationship, and any sort of little fracture or crack creates this, during those times of stress, we freak out. We're like, what's going on? I need to know you're there. And sometimes that can be a response of appeasing. So some of us do the thing of like, I'm going to just try to keep you happy. It can look really codependent in that way.
Yeah.
It can also be anger. It can be like, why, I texted you half an hour ago and I've been sitting here stressed out, worried that you're mad at me. And now you told me everything's fine. And now I'm mad at you because I had to wait here and sit in this place of insecurity.
Can I pause you real fast and actually ask something? So if anger is the motivator, I just want to paint a picture for the listeners. If anger is the motivator to an anxious attachment style that manifests in as you said, just say neediness, clinginess, are we okay, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because of how anger exists as an emotion, behind the anger is another driver.
Mm-hmm.
What
Mm-hmm.
often is that in clients that you work with? Is it unworthiness? Is it a lack of healthy self-worth? Because I think we have to get below the surface of the anger to say, wait a minute, if this is manifesting in anxious attachment behavior, in clinginess, in codependency, in neediness, where's the gap in your sense of unworthiness, belonging, identity? Where do we go in that aspect of the conversation?
Right. Yeah. And that really is what's undergirding this is, I don't know if I'm lovable enough for you to stick around.
In and of myself.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Okay. This is huge. Take us deeper.
Yeah. And so, and what makes it hard sometimes is other people don't see that. They don't see that, I don't feel lovable. They see, if this is you, they see you getting mad, right? They're like, and actually what they do is they back away. They will put distance, right? You're mad at me, so I'm going to go in the other room. I'm going to run away from you. And that only confirms that feeling of like, yeah, I am unlovable. I'm reaching out to you and you're just going in the other room. And of course, to you, it feels like reaching out. To the other person, it feels like you're yelling at me and you're mad at me and you don't want me here. And so you can think about actually it, think about a toddler. When you drop your toddler off at daycare and they throw a fit and they scream, right? That actually is a way of them saying, I need that connection. I need you. Right. And we do the same thing in relationships sometimes. And it really is important to start to understand, oh, this anger is there for a reason. This anger says, I feel like I'm not lovable. I'm not valuable to you. And actually, if you can talk through that with a partner or someone that's important to you, right, that actually can help with that insecurity. So if I say, turn to my partner and say, I got real emotional there because it brought up this feeling like you don't like me. And that gives them an opportunity to be like, we're good. I love you. We're okay. If I get really mad and attack them, right? And what's undergirding that is I need to know that I'm valuable and I'm mad at you that you're not telling me I'm valuable or showing me I'm valuable, right? It doesn't give that partner a chance to respond vulnerably. They're just going to run in the opposite direction.
Well, this is interesting because I think this is sort of a biopsy on the distortion of healthy relationship dynamics and culture today, because some would look at neediness and clinginess and say, I'm just loving you really well. I'm just a deep lover. I love hard or whatever that might be. I show extreme affection. And I'm like, wait a minute, hold on. Yeah, some people do love well, love hard, love deep, however you want to say it. But I guess the point is we have to get underneath the hood to look at motivations is what I hear you saying. Because we're either motivated from, and Dan Allender and I talked about this on the podcast. You guys remember, Crispin, where I believe in life, the dominant two motivators are fear or love. Fear leads to shame. Shame manifests in self-protection or self-promotion. So it's really interesting as we dig this hole deeper, how we find root issues. So let's go back to that one person who is predominantly needy or clingy. But as we get below the surface, we're like, oh, fundamentally, I believe I am fatally flawed and unworthy of finding belonging in any relationship of my life. Where do you begin as a therapist to help them out of that? Because if we go, this is like functional medicine of the soul. If we start there, we have a much better chance at creating healthier dynamics for the long haul. What do you say?
Yeah, definitely. And really it starts with owning that part and looking at that part and finding that person in your life, or like I would include God in this.
Yeah.
Right. To be able to say, yeah, this is really how I feel. And can you meet me here? Can you meet me in this insecurity? And the other piece too is to what has been so helpful for me in attachment theory is that unlovableness is not because you are unlovable. It is because of the way that you've been treated. And people often go to parents, and often it is parent dynamics, but it could be other ways that this shows up. But what we know from attachment research is that if you have this sense that I am unlovable, there's something fatally flawed with me, mm-hmm. It's not because of something you've done. It's because of the way you've been treated. Your sense of self is formed in the relationships, in the early relationships you have.
That's like mirror neurons, right? I mean, mm-hmm. I'm getting into the weeds here, folks. So you just got to chill, right. Bear with me here. But this is mirror neurons at work, which is such mm-hmm. a primitive expression in relationships. Mm-hmm. I see you smile, I smile. I see you mm-hmm. move in a nonverbal way. I do the same. Mm-hmm. And this is early in life, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really. I mean, you're hitting it on the head, is that we know that in order to feel worthwhile, to feel lovable, eye contact, parent to child eye contact, having parents that respond to our needs is really important. And having parents that, or someone in your life that delights in you, that when you walk in the room, their eyes light up, right? Those are the sorts of things. And they're so nonverbal that create that sense within of I'm lovable, I'm okay. Right. And so that's a lot of understanding that part of like, if I feel this way, it's not because it's true, but I have a framework that maybe somewhere along the way, right? Like this is what humans do. It makes me think about, we had a kitten that we got at the beginning of the pandemic. And
I was going to make a snarky comment, but I realized I don't know you super well, so I'm just going to leave that alone.
In our defense, it was like on our radar for a while. But, the first couple of days when she came home with us, she smelled so bad. And it's because when kittens are separated from their mother, they just biologically, this thing happens. That when there's this attachment trauma, you could say, right, it just, they smell bad. They release this hormone, and it has a function.
You're kidding me.
No, isn't that so interesting?
Wow.
Yeah. And of course it's, I'm assuming it's a self-protective, like
100%.
Nobody's going to want to eat me because I smell terrible. Mm-hmm. Right. With humans, I like to think of that same thing of like, when your needs aren't met, it automatically creates this shame feeling that is deeper than words, that embodies itself in the right hemisphere of your brain. Just this really deep feeling that says like, there's something wrong with me. And it's just because of like biologically how we're designed in a way.
Well, this is stunning because trauma lives in the right hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
Pain and pleasure exist in the same area of the brain. So this makes it incredibly difficult then, I would surmise, in the process of maturity. In fact, let's just stay on shame, and I'll use myself as a case study for this, because this whole issue, honestly, Crispin, is wildly personal for me, because in some relationships of my past, especially, no matter what I've done or haven't done, I've felt this overriding sense of shame that motivates me. Now, here it is, guys. Listen to this, because some of you can relate to this. To work harder, to strive, and then operate outside my temperament and my identity in order to fit in. Brene Brown talks about fitting in versus belonging, and I think that's a great distinction. But really, what I'm talking about here is not belonging. I'm talking about fitting in. It's like, Crispin, it's like I always sensed something was wrong in the undercurrent of the dynamic of the relationship. And that's really hard and confusing. So for those of us who can really just say, yep, I'm very familiar with that. In fact, to my knowledge, you actually are familiar with this based upon what I read in the book.
Yeah.
Unpack that experience from a therapy perspective, then help us understand the way out.
Yeah. So it, again, recognizing this comes from this idea of, if I don't hold on to mom's skirt, she's not going to stick around. Right. That's what it looks like in a 1-year-old. Right.
Yeah.
Like I have to be the one to keep this connection. I have to be the one to keep the closeness. The responsibility falls on me. And then what we do is we go through our life doing just that, and we never get a chance to experience anything different. I'll share, my wife and I were in couples therapy a few years ago, actually doing the type of therapy that I practice now. It was so helpful then that I was like, I want to learn how to do this with other folks. And I realized, it just dawned on me, I get up and make coffee for my wife every single morning because I don't want her to leave me. And she's like, what the heck are you talking about? We've been married over 10 years. Like, what?
Wait a minute.
But
are you being serious?
Yeah. But in my head,
Wow.
On a logical level, yeah, I know that's not true, but like, that's what's driving my behaviors.
Huge. Yeah.
Right. Is like, if I can be useful to you, if I can do things for you, then you won't leave me.
Scarcity.
Right. And what ends up happening is like, you can live through your whole marriage that way. Right. And unless you can have a vulnerable conversation with your partner or with someone in your community, this is really generalizable to all relationships, right? Unless you can say, I'm worried that if I don't try really hard, that you're going to leave me, and have that other person say, that's not why I like you. That's not why I didn't marry you because you make me coffee in the morning. I like you. I am here because of you. Right. And those are some of the sorts of things that can be really healing. And so, but it really takes such a risk to be able to tell someone that.
Well, there's the key. There's the operative word, risk. Relationships require risk. Now, I'm taking notes pretty ferociously here because you're just dropping so many good things here, Crispin. But I wrote down this phrase as it relates to this scarcity mindset that we would have in a relationship. And the phrase is this: if I don't, it won't. So I'll give you an example and then we can talk through it. So I know a lot of adult children who feel burdened to initiate and then maintain a relationship with a parent who's passive, distant, and is unable to initiate and step into intimacy. That's really a frustrating experience. Talk to those adult children. What do we need to know through scarcity and what you've just shared about how to even frame up that dynamic of the relationship without then thinking, I'm just so frustrated. I could just throw my hands up because it's not what I have or haven't done. I just can't seem to get through and I'm exhausted trying. So again, it's adult children who feel burdened to initiate and maintain a relationship with a passive, distant parent.
Yeah. Well, and that speaks right there to attachment, which is, I have this drive to connect with this person. If this was any other person in my life, if this was a friend, if this was a coworker, I would have given up a long time ago. Right. But like, this feels like such an important person to me. I think sitting with people in that situation, because I do that a lot, and some of this really feels generational to me. I notice a lot of, in our generation, we've learned, I'm a millennial.
Yeah, me too.
We've learned a bit about emotions and so then we want to talk about those emotions with our parents, and our parents are like, what are you like? I don't know how to do this. And I think that's a lot of what it is recognizing, we'll talk about shutdown attachment in a minute.
Yep.
But recognizing, you might have a parent that doesn't know how to do it. And recognizing, you've been at this for a long time. It's probably not going to change. And so how do you, first of all, slow down and notice the pain and loss there, right? I have this parent I want to connect with. Feels like they're not putting in the effort on the other end. And so, first of all, I need to make some room for that pain. And then secondly, I think deciding for you, if I know that this is what I'm going to get for the rest of my life, what am I willing to give? You know, can I come to expect this? And some people say, yeah, this isn't a relationship that I'm willing to continue. And some people say, yeah, I just know that this is what I'm going to get. I've had a few clients through the years that have told me, you know, I just realized I've outgrown my parents and I love them and they'll be in my life, but I can't expect them to get to the level of maturity that I've gotten to.
So. I've outgrown my parents. That's a really sad statement to hear.
Yeah.
What do you tell clients then in that space about how to get healthy from the inside out so that they know how to set boundaries? And, you know, folks, we've talked about this a ton on the podcast, but for intentional repetition, you know, Crispin, what I tell clients of my own and people I'm pastoring or coaching is that setting boundaries isn't saying you can't do that anymore. Boundaries is saying you can do whatever you want, but if you do, this is the fence that I'm setting up. This is the consequence. That's really hard inside of this anxious attachment style. I would suspect that boundaries in and of themselves, right? So unhook us from anxious attachment style and then talk about setting better boundaries. And then I actually just want to turn it back to you to talk about shutdown attachment style.
Yeah. So that's really where figuring out, the thing is that we're gonna have that connection with someone, and that connection with our important person really is going to drive our behavior. And so if we get a message that, you know what, you need to show up and talk about the weather every Sunday for dinner, you know, with my adult parents, and that's the way we do relationship, you're going to do that because that's the way your attachment system taking over and saying, I need to have this connection. So then we go to, well, what are some maybe healthier connections you can have? How can you shift your attachment so that you can find security in other relationships? And so, you know, thinking through, even as I've had to set some boundaries with family members, that felt really scary because it's like, who am I going to call when my car breaks down? And it actually took some like reflecting to be like, oh, actually, I have people in my life that aren't family that I've known forever that will come help me if my car breaks down, you know, like, but taking the time to grieve the loss of that relationship. And it could be a cutoff, but it could be a loss of what you hope that relationship would be and finding it elsewhere. I think of a really clear example for me is I have this friend, Mark, who I met at church. He's my dad's age. I don't have a great relationship with my dad.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's always like strings attached or whatever it is. It's just kind of messy. And then I have this friend, Mark, and we've been friends for about 6 years now. And I'll never forget this time I met him for coffee and we're hanging out and talking. And he said, just let me know when you need to go. I know that you're busy. I know you have kids. He's like, I just like any minute I get to spend with you. You know, I enjoy it, but you know, I know you're busy, like you can go. And so it's just this like generous, like I delight in you. I like spending time with you. And also like, I don't have any, like, there's no strings attached to my love. And so finding some other healthy relationships has been for me a way of realizing that I'm lovable. And in fact, some of it has even been for me throughout the years, like, does God like me? Does God really love me in that way? Does God just bear with me? And then I think, oh, well, Mark likes me. And I can use that like as a framework. And that actually is a way of hacking your attachment system, because God is invisible. And so it's hard sometimes for us to change the way we experience God. But if we can think about the people that God has put in our lives as a representation of how God feels about us, that actually changes our attachment with God.
Yeah. And we're going to get into exactly that, because attachment styles as relating to our relationship with the Lord is huge. I want to spend some time on that with you, but I want to give you some space to talk about shutdown attachment style.
Yeah. And so this is basically where we tell ourselves, I don't need others. I'm fine on my own. We tend to be distant, and it feels kind of ironic, or it feels kind of paradoxical. Like, how would this be a way of keeping connection? But you think about a kid that is, 4 years old. His mom takes him to the park. He runs and scrapes his knee. And, he starts to cry, and he looks back at his mom. And because of his past experiences, he thinks, I can go over to mom. I could, get a hug from her, but I know she's going to be actually annoyed. She's going to be annoyed that I fell. She's going to be annoyed with my emotions. So what I've learned is, if I want to keep mom close, if I want to keep things good between me and mom, I have to stuff my emotions down. And if you grow up in a family like that, you don't get someone to help you with your emotions. You don't have someone saying, hey, like, let me connect with you in these emotions. You learn, if I want to keep the people that I love around, I have to be okay. I have to be strong. I have to be independent.
Man. So if we look at that child who hurts themselves or is in need, and they're motivated to take care of themselves, to stuff it, what does that adult look like? How does that adult typically manifest?
Right. So that's the adult that's like, oh, I'm not emotional. I'm logical. I'm right.
Whoa.
And what is unknown to that person and to the people around them is, I like to think about it this way, is, and, I talk about this in the book. For other people in their life, if you know someone like this in your life, you're like, why are you always shutting me out? You're not telling me what you're feeling. You're just, you're putting up this wall between us. And I like to think it's sort of like a house, and they've just drawn all the blinds. But for that person, that's not what it's like. It's like the emotions have been stuffed in the basement. They've just been pushed down there. Door's been locked. They're like, I don't know what they are either. I don't know what I'm feeling. I just know to stuff them down to avoid them. And why would I want to pull those emotions out of the basement? One, I have learned that just drives other people away. It's too much for the people that I love. Two, I never had anyone to help me figure out, how do I manage emotions, right? It's like, what are they even for? They only drive people away, and they feel really scary and overwhelming. And so you think about people that are like, I don't like emotions. I just want to problem solve. Really, what's under that is, emotions are so scary for me. I don't know how to talk about them. And I don't know how to reach out to other people when I need help.
Do thoughts affect emotions, or do emotions affect thoughts? In other words, which informs which? And I have a theory, because Paul told us to take every thought captive, not every emotion captive. So I have a working idea, but I'd love to hear your thoughts from a therapeutic perspective.
Yeah, well, this is a big debate right now in psychology, because for a long time we talked about cognitive behavioral therapy, and if you can change your thoughts, you can change your feelings. The science of it is actually it's all mixed up together. But
the answer is yes. So do thoughts affect feelings, or feelings affect thoughts? Yes, the answer is yes.
Right. Yeah. The really nerdy response is, there's first appraisal, then there's meaning making, then there's second appraisal. Like, it's thoughts and feelings kind of alternating back and forth in our brains.
So it's kind of true. Like, the answer is yes.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. However, what I find to be really helpful, and this relates to thoughts and feelings, is if we can slow down and understand our emotions, then we can go forward from there. And
because
so
emotions are really helpful. They're not good. They're not bad. They're just helpful and adaptive for our learning. So we need to be able to slow our pace to, it's metacognition, to say, I'm feeling really triggered today, or I'm feeling really hopeless today. David did this in the Psalm. So, people are like, Chris, what are you doing? That's so woo-woo. No.
Yeah.
It's science. David asked his soul, why are you cast down? Hope in God. So we're able to, my friend, Dr. Caroline Leaf, says it this way, like we can step away from our experience and look inside ourselves, so to speak, to say, not inside ourselves in a introspective way. I'm saying look at our circumstances objectively from the outside, so to speak, so that we can gain perspective and go, wonder what's informing this. Is that essentially what I hear you saying?
Yeah, definitely. And that's when we have those healthy relationships growing up, that's where we learn how to do that. So if I feel really, I'm in second grade and I have my first school project ever, and, if we go with the shutdown attachment piece, it's like, all right, I just got to white knuckle through it. And actually what we find is with those kids, even though they're not showing their emotions on the outside, heart rates are just as high as kids that are showing outside. And so, you're still feeling the emotions and the stress. You're just not showing them outwardly. But yeah, you got the second grader. I just got to white knuckle through it, and then you get rewards like, oh, he did it all on his own, right? He's a really great kid. Look at, he's so independent. Versus, the second grader where, I have kids where it's like, they're having a meltdown and they're crying and like, how can I ever get this done? And me as a parent to say, oh, I see, you feel so overwhelmed right now. You feel like this is too big. Oh, that makes sense. But let me tell you, I'm going to be here to help you get through it. And I know that you can get to the other side of it and you're going to be okay. So there's both this like challenging the thought of like, I can't do this, but there's also validating the emotion of like, oh yeah, I can see why you feel overwhelmed. And if we grow up like that, then we can become adults that are able to make more sense of their emotions and be I see that I'm feeling overwhelmed, or, I see that I'm feeling really anxious about this. I'm really worried about the bills, but, I've had someone with me before in this emotion, and I know that I can get through it. The other thing too, I would just add, the other thing is these are also people that continue that pattern. So they're the person that is, sits down with their partner and says, man, I've felt really sad the last couple of days and I'm not sure why. And often if you have someone that is close to you or a friend, right, you're probably going to figure out why through that conversation. And then you can move forward. You don't have to necessarily stay in that sadness, but it's not the same as like, well, I'm just going to tell myself to not feel sad and just keep going.
How do we determine which attachment style we lean to?
So, there are a few quizzes out there. I have an assessment in my book around faith attachment styles. But a lot of times it's looking at, do I downplay emotions or do I tend to upplay them? So, do I turn the volume up or do I turn the volume down is a really good place to start.
Got it. Okay. So let's take this into our attachment style relating to our relationship with the Lord. This is, in fact, I'll just take a quick TV timeout. Go to wintoday.tv right now. In the show notes, guys, this is a link to purchase Crispin's brand new book, Attached to God. And I think this is really interesting, this whole perspective, because this has been really helpful in perhaps keeping people secure in their relationship with the Lord. when challenge comes, when heartache comes, when difficulty comes in their circumstances. So I want to paint a picture for listeners straight from your own words. Crispin, you wrote this quote, "After all, when it comes to distance, God can't be the problem. So in a two-factor scenario, like a personal relationship with God, distance leads to the inevitable conclusion. The problem is with me. I must be selfish, lazy, or self-absorbed. So to prove we are none of these things, we continue to try to go along the path we've been pointed down. Along the way, we add item after item to the to-do list. And, that can be getting up earlier, having longer quiet time, or whatever that might be. So Crispin, this is an exhausting rhythm, but it's so close for people. Teach us how to get off the performance acceptance hamster wheel."
Yeah. So we hit on this earlier, talking about when you're anxious or whatever strategy you use, a lot of times that robs you of the chance to be able to experience something different. Right. So if I'm always working so hard to keep God close through devotions, through going to church, through, trying to not sin, all those
good things.
Right. Exactly. And I love what you said about fear or love. Right. And is it coming from a place of love, or is it coming from a place of fear? Right. Am I going to be abandoned if I don't do this? And what I think is really striking, thinking about attachment research, is that one of the things that we find that promotes secure attachment is time where we're just doing nothing with that person that's close to us. So a mom just holding her baby, or, me playing games with my 6-year-old son, or, whatever it is, but it's like, we're just together and we don't have a goal. It's not to do a specific thing. It's just for us to connect. We find that promotes secure attachment. And what I've found looking through scripture is it seems like God knew this. Well, of course, God knew this, but this was part of the reasoning around Sabbath. God brings Israel out of Egypt, where they just worked and worked and worked, and says, we're going to have a whole day that's just devoted to us being together as a community with your family, with God. And that has been so helpful for me to think about, like, how do I practice Sabbath in my spiritual practices? Because growing up in the church, it was always like, all right, if I'm going to have time with God, like, I need to better understand the Bible, or have a word, or know what I'm doing next, etc. And so for me, it's been shifting. How do I practice Sabbath in the sense of, how do I just have time with God that's not about doing something, about getting something done? And so for me, it's been sometimes like, I'm going to set a timer on my phone for 10 minutes and I'm just going to be quiet. I'm going to rest. I'm going to rest with God. Sometimes it's meditation on God loving me, but that's really where we start, is like, this really isn't about me, taking my 20 minutes to make sure that I'm reading the Bible enough or that sort of thing. It's really about how can we be together. And then I look at Jesus, and Jesus talks about Sabbath being for people, not people for Sabbath. Right. And so I think that's another piece. Like, it's not that God needs us to do Sabbath so that we can, like, show God, like, we're glorifying you, we're doing this stuff. Right. Actually, God's like, no, this is for you. This is because I want you to rest. And so I think that has been really, really a shift for me to realize I don't have to strive all the time. Actually, there's this whole piece that both Old Testament law and Jesus talked about that coincides with what we know about attachment research and secure attachment and feeling connected.
So let's just make this legal so people don't think we're just throwing out hyperbole here. Psalm 46:10, be still and know. The Hebrew word for know is yada. That is an experience-based intimacy, not an intellectual knowing. And so how is that forged? by our willingness to be still, to be present, and just to sit in it. So I think that's really powerful. But for people, Crispin, I think one of the underpinning narratives here is insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
I'm insecure about who I am. Therefore, I am like, nope, I can't sit still. I can't do nothing because my vulnerability and my perceived unworthiness is now exposed. So how do we first unhook insecurity in this conversation?
Yeah, that's so important. And I find just honesty being the place to start.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that we see this throughout scripture. You see all these people being really honest with God. And I think that's where we start to say, God, I want to rest with you, but that feels really scary. That feels almost too risky.
Yep.
It feels too risky to just sit here and do nothing, because those feelings of unworthiness come up that I've been trying to outrun all day or all week. Would you be with me with these feelings, even if they come up?
So related to this, what we feel and what we think about our relationship with God can be different experiences. You touched on this in the book early on. And that disconnect can be really hard to manage. What do we need to know about this perceived disconnect? And then how do we reconcile it? In other words, we read, of course, God loves us, but do we feel it?
Right. Yeah. So I have a friend, Heather Patton Griffin, and she acknowledges she heard this from a pastor a long time ago, but she likes to say, the way that we talk to ourselves is how we assume God talks to us. And I thought that was such a simple way to start to understand the difference between what we believe about God and think about God and the way that we feel about God. And a lot of times, if we're really self-critical, that usually correlates with how we think God approaches us as well. And there have actually been studies done about, what people think and what people feel about God, and they're different. Part of that is because they're different parts of our brain. We can store those theological facts in the front of our brain. But that relational knowledge, like you were talking about, is different. And so I have quite a few practices in the book to kind of start to get at, what do I actually feel about God? What's the feeling of my relationship with God? Does it feel like God likes me? Does it feel like God is always disappointed in me? And then I really believe taking that to God is the way to go, and also other people in our lives. But to be able to say, God, it feels like you're always disappointed in me. And there are ways that we can think that we can hack our attachment systems. So thinking about that person in your life that likes you, sometimes doing some art journaling can be really helpful. But in my experience, a lot of it has been, God, it feels like you don't like me, and I need help. Like I need help believing something different about you. And then
if you would unpack a couple of those attachment practices. Not attachment practices. What do we want to say? Yeah. Is it attachment practices?
Yeah.
I mean, basically what I'm getting at is like,
right.
Help us hack these attachment systems that we have in place. What are a couple of these practices that we can employ? How do they play out so that we can reconcile this?
Right. Yeah. In the, putting the book together, I was thinking through what are spiritual practices for each attachment style.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah. And so, one is, it's hard to know how God feels towards you because God is invisible. And so, so much of our attachment system is really based on the nonverbals, right? How the people about you, how the people in your life feel about you. And it's not usually what they say. It's everything else, right? And so that's how our attachment systems are designed. They're just picking up all this nonverbal information all the time. And we don't always have that with God. There are, of course, times where the Holy Spirit really gives us clear messages. We do experience God, I believe, but that's not as consistent as the messages that I get from my coworker or from my kids or whoever it is. And I believe that God knew this because God continually throughout scripture, we see God saying, put up this reminder, put up this altar to remind you of my compassion. Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me. And I think what that says there is we need more than words to heal our attachments, to be reminded that God likes us.
Yeah.
And so thinking about what are things for you that are helpful, and that can be really different for different people. For me, I had this beautiful experience of God just telling me clearly, I'm your mother. I'm taking care of you. You can cry on my chest anytime you need. And I was like, are you sure? Like, that doesn't fit my theology. And then I walked into this, I was actually at a Catholic garden, and I walked into this chapel, that I was expecting to be quiet, and there's a baby in there wailing. It was just amazing. And so that for me has been something I've carried with me, but people have a lot of different things, so for you thinking, what is it for me that is a continual reminder of God's love? And it might be a song, it might be a picture, it might be a person, but having that to hang on to, I think actually is walking in the tradition of scripture of, God wants to continually remind us, because we do easily forget, because we are insecure, vulnerable humans. I think that's part of being human. And God knows that we need those reminders.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there's been a lot of conversation around trauma in the last few years, as well as trauma bonding in relationships. But is there a perspective or an aspect of trauma that we're missing in our understanding within this collective dialogue, Crispin? Maybe something that's keeping us from moving forward through it more effectively?
Yeah. When I think one of the, let me start that over. There's actually a lot of research around trauma and attachment. And we find that those that have someone to talk to lean on, right, can go through horrific things and they heal. They're able to come through with resilience on the other side of it. And so as a society, right, we're learning more and more about all different kinds of traumas that have occurred and are occurring. And one thing that can be really hard about it is it's hard to find spaces to talk about it. And I think that's one of the pieces that that I think we know on some level. It's important to talk about trauma. It's important to be able to name the reality of it, to integrate it into our story, and to know and to be known in that way of it being part of our story. And yet it's still really hard because so many traumatizing things, we just have this natural aversion to talking about it, which makes sense. Whether it's, childhood sexual abuse, that's a difficult topic, right? And at the same time, if we can talk about these things, there is going to be more connection and healing.
No, that's really helpful. What moves us from being shut down to engage then?
So, like I said before, emotions are really scary. And often what happens, there's this dynamic that happens where that person that's not very good at emotions, right? Maybe they'll try, maybe they'll have someone in their life that's like, I don't know what you're feeling. And they try, but they're not very good at it. And then they don't get a good response because that other person is like, it feels like you're just not telling me what you're really thinking or really feeling. And so it's really finding safe places to say, I think this is what I'm feeling and I'm not sure why. Because a lot of times we have that pressure. If I'm going to say what I'm feeling, I have to know why it is. I have to be able to figure it out, etc. And so having a safe place to say, I think I'm feeling this and I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to tell you, and to have other people in our lives be like, oh my gosh, even though maybe to someone who's on the anxious end, the other end of the spectrum, that sounded like nothing at all, to them, it felt so vulnerable.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Any other practical tips day to day? Monday morning hits, the barrage of shame, the barrage of, I'll just use an example because we unpacked it here. Anxious attachment style comes into play, and I'm feeling it's not anything I haven't said or have said. I am questioning every text message I sent yesterday. I'm wondering why this person hasn't texted me back. I'm trying to go about my day, but there is this undercurrent of anxiety and insecurity. It's Monday morning. What would you say if I'm sitting in your office? Crispin, help me today. Beyond theory, what can I do today to begin to make some systemic changes? What would you say?
Yeah. So, these are the kind of questions that we're asking in society. How do I deal with these uncomfortable feelings? Maybe I know that on some sense, that person's probably busy and me sending them a barrage of text messages isn't going to help. And yet we know that one of the most effective ways to regulate our emotions and therefore our thoughts is actually through connecting with others. And so, you think of, it just comes so naturally as a parent. If my kid is upset about something, I will hold him close and I will take deep breaths because I know that he will intuitively pick up on that calm and it will be contagious. And so part of it is figuring out who can I co-regulate with? And so it can be, picturing that the face of that person that really likes you. Maybe it's a grandma, maybe whoever it is. And it might be connecting with God in that way and thinking about what's it like to be, the apple of God's eye. What is it like to be delighted in? We can't think ourselves out of these feelings of insecurity. John Bowlby, the founder of attachment theory, said, we're only as needy as our unmet needs.
Wow.
And so this idea of like, if that insecurity is coming up, it's not something to be pushed out. It's something that needs to be met in that moment. And it might not be met by that person that you're feeling insecure about, but it means finding, where can I find that security? And like I said, it might be another, like a closer friend that you text and say, I'm just feeling really insecure this morning. Just wanted to reach out and, maybe they're able to encourage you. And I know this is putting up flags for some people. Isn't that codependent?
Yeah, I was going to ask that.
Right. When we can ask for what we need in a way that's vulnerable, that's where the co-regulation comes in. It's codependent to say, why didn't you text me? Didn't you know what it was like for me? Right. It is not codependent to say, it was kind of hard for me because I was kind of worried that maybe you didn't like me. And that is that person to be able to say, oh, I do like you.
Renee says, the story I'm telling myself is this. What I hear you saying, or rather the way this is hitting me, is we're reflecting meaning. We're reflecting the dynamics of what's happening in our heart, which can initiate a conversation, not a monologue of accusation.
Right. Exactly. Yep. If we can own our own part in a vulnerable way, we're inviting other people into relationship and engagement with us.
It's really helpful. I'm curious about this, and this is unrelated to the topic, but I'm thinking about it now because, I jokingly say this, you look across social media and I call it therapy in squares. Every other social media account is, a therapist or a millennial therapist or this and that. And it's helpful, of course, but it's just all over the place. Now, one of the things I've been seeing a lot is conversation around regulating our nervous system and, dysregulation within. I'd love to just know your thoughts on polyvagal theory. If you know anything about polyvagal, Stephen Porges, his work. I think respectfully, I think the jury's a little out. I don't know how much science there is to it. I mean, I do know from a scientific perspective, the vagus nerve, 12th cranial, is very powerful. But I don't know, just any scientific thoughts about polyvagal theory and, this big grandeur around nervous system regulation and deregulation. Any thoughts?
Yeah. Within the emotionally focused therapy community, we do talk quite a bit about this because when we talk about polyvagal theory and whatever that is, I agree. There's the science is still out on that.
Right.
But clearly we go through these different mind states. And so when I'm feeling afraid and panicked, I mean, that's one of the things is whether it's with God or a partner or a friend, when I'm in that place of like, I don't know if we're okay, we can have that sort of abandonment panic and the things that we once knew we don't know anymore. Wow. And so a lot of it is about how do we bring ourselves back to that place. And sometimes we need that ice pack on our chest to remind ourselves I'm okay. But what we know is that being able to reach out to someone, for me, I'll share this. It's a continual image of God rubbing my back. Like I can close my eyes, bring that to mind. It's just been a powerful thing for me. And it does calm me down. And it's not the same as trying to talk myself out of the worry or anxiety. It's like, just like a parent, right? As parents, we don't do that. We don't say, oh, what you're feeling is wrong. Let me tell you the 10 reasons why it's wrong. We get close and we hold our kid. And so it's that same thing of, how can we create a sense of safety? Because relational safety creates safety in our bodies.
Relational safety creates safety in our bodies. And this is the point. This is why, Crispin, the listeners here hear me say this a lot. Transformation beats self-help 11 times out of 10. Wholeness is recognizing that no one domain of our life can function independent of the other two. We are spirit, we are soul. Rather, we are spirit, we have a soul, we live in a body. And I think you just brought a lot of credence to that. So, man, Crispin,
if I could add one thing,
please do it.
It's so true, because whether it's couples therapy or it's relationship with God, we want to know what's the right way to do it so that I don't feel bad, right? Man. How can we not get into arguments, right? But really, like the transformational piece is like, when we get in an argument, how can I reach out to you and say, I feel hurt? Or with God, right? Like I want to know all the ways so that I never feel distant from God. But the better thing is, what's it look like when I feel distant from God, to vulnerably share that with God and the people in my life? And that's harder, but it's the only way to be human. There's no solutions to avoid those points of rupture. It's more learning, what do we do when we get into them?
Not only is it harder, you said, it's the only way to be human. And I want to just add this. These aren't life hacks. These are deeply transformative exercises and practices that we can put into play to change not only our mind, but our mindset, our default internal narrative regarding ourselves and the world around us, because we don't see the world as it is. We see it as we are. So it behooves us to pursue wholeness, to pursue transformation from the inside out. So again, Crispin, your book, man, Attached to God, it's available right now. I've loved this conversation with you. Easily one of my favorite conversations I've had in a while. So I'm pumped that you joined me today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. I just love talking about this stuff, and I really appreciate how much you engaged. Let me rephrase that. I really appreciate, obviously, the work you went into reading the book beforehand.
Yeah.
Just such a fun conversation to have.
Thank you so much. Well, hey, before I let you go, tell people how to connect with you.
Yeah. So you can find me on Twitter under Crispin Mayfield. There aren't that many of us out there. Yeah. And I'm also on Instagram, and mostly just finding, tweeting out random things about attachment, science, and faith. And you can head over to attachedtogod.com to find where to buy a book near you.
Awesome. Well, I mean, immediately, guys, just go to the show notes at wintoday.tv, and then there will be a link in there to get your copy today. But Crispin, thank you. What a great conversation.
Thank you.